Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Painter from Seville by Sonya van de Graaff, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue. The Rio Guadalquivir meanders languidly through the valley of Seville, as if pausing for breath on its long journey from the high mountains deep in the Sierra de Cazorla before wending purposefully on through the woodlands, olive groves, and vineyards to finally spill into the wild waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It evokes a world unto itself as if bestowed by a divine scheme as a stimulus for philosophers and a salve for those who have loved and lost. In recent times, the river has seen the demise of the Moors and the rise of the Catholics. It has been witness to the consecration of the great Cathedral of Seville and seen the way in which the whole of the valley clusters elliptically around the great edifice like a defenseless body around its sun. In the vestry of the cathedral, a priest resides. He leans against the soiled window ledge, his walking sticks within reach, and his thoughts center on the young woman within his line of sight, tending to her stallion in the forecourt of her home, the Palacio del Cathedral. Only the cathedral gardens separate them. She is of fine stature and singular beauty, and yet utterly unaffected by these attributes. Or perhaps, having no father to admire her, nor mother capable of advising her, she is simply unaware. He has set it as his own task to watch over her, for she is of a willful nature and, in his darkest thoughts, a threat to herself and all he values. At a tentative knock on his door, he reaches for his sticks and turns his focus to the interrogation he is about to conduct in readiness for the impending Inquisition. Chapter 1. August 1512. It was already approaching the time for lauds, and Francisca was still working at the fresco. She's bent to dip the paintbrush into the pigment and conceded defeat to some locks of her hair, which persistently evaded their braided confinement. She held the handle towards the very end and, with a fluid wrist, liberally applied the indigo to the wet plaster. A breeze finally fluttered through the atrium, and the flares attached to the banisters of the staircase flickered, breaking the even light. She took it as a sign, tossed the brush into a flask of solvent solution, and covered the plaster mixture and egg tempera with waxed paper so that they would not harden. She gathered the hems of her skirt and took care, walking along the wooden planks and descending the rows of ladders to the atrium floor. Several months had passed since she had begun her work at the fresco, and although she had made good progress, there was still much to do. She wanted it to be perfect, but she also wanted it to be complete in time for her Uncle Carlos's return. From several details in his last letter, she estimated that might be as soon as El Dia de Todos los Santos, All Saints' Day. That was not even 3 months away, and so it was especially vexing she would not be at liberty to continue her work for some time. As consolation as well as reward, she decided to grant herself the luxury of a viewing for the very first time. She had imagined some ceremony in the occasion, but the reality was that she went to the middle of the atrium with leaden legs and shallow breaths. By the fountain, she turned around and looked up, and braced herself for the truth. She gasped. It was beautiful and dramatic, more beautiful and dramatic than she had dared hope. Even though the clunky scaffolding, the vast wall seemed alive, vindicating her decision to apply wet plaster rather than to paint directly onto the etching. She surveyed the wall along the horizontal line to check for narrative coherence, and was satisfied. The color scheme imbued momentum, compelling the viewer to follow the storyline. But the longer she looked, the more exasperated she became that she could not see the picture free from the scaffolding's obstruction. She had never had that privilege. Everything she knew of the picture was what she had discovered at close range on the planks of the scaffolding, dissolving the lime wash, cleaning the wall, and applying the plaster and pigments small section by small section. The etching, her mother's last work, to which she had been applying the fresco, had been concealed for a decade and a half under layers of lime wash. She had only recently discovered the picture hiding like a ghost in the wall by a trick of the light. Her efforts at finding a sketch had proven fruitless. If her mother had drawn one, it had been lost or destroyed. The only suggestion of a plan lay in the remnants of the perspective design. There was a hole in the wall where her mother had hammered a nail to signify the vanishing line, and lines were marked in the edges of the wall for the orthogonals radiating outward from the hole. Her eye kept returning to the uppermost corner, where the griffin soared in the big sky, and she imagined she caught its gaze. In the way of a certain magic that the early hours can conjure, Particularly in one with scant sleep, Francisca opened a door in her mind and entered another realm. With all the power of a drug-enhanced state, she became the griffin with its body of a lion and wings of an eagle, and she burst out of the wall and wrested the entire picture, all 12 characters in the landscape, from it. Trusting in Providence, she flapped with all her might, dragging the picture behind her. She rose up and up, navigating amongst the tangled fronds of the tall palms, grazing each of the atrium's corners until the picture broke free from the wall. The landscape and characters floated in the sky and shimmered with life. She looked for what she had come for, her mother. There, by the edge of the dry ravine, she found her. Tears streaming down her mother's face, and her arm, outstretched to Francisca's father, hung there, unreceived. Her father's eyes were defiant and affixed to the sky. There was no doubting it signified a rift between her parents, and it struck her with the force of a physical blow. Reconciliation was impossible in a tragedy that had befallen the family when Francisca was a small child. Her father had died. Francisca heaved with unconsolable sobs, sobs that had never fully poured forth, but had needed to. When she sufficiently restored, she looked again to follow her mother's gaze. It directed her to the mountain peak where stood a mysterious figure. Francisca soared towards it, and to her surprise, the character within reach of the mysterious figure was Marina, her mother's nurse, at the time of the picture barely more than a child too, and her mother's chambermaid. Marina had angel wings, and Francisca sensed with growing fascination that Marina was a significant character in the picture. When Francisca came to, she was slumped on the cool mosaic floor by the fountain's ledge, emotionally exhausted, but her mind was racing to catch up with her discoveries. It was not unusual for a picture to contain symbolism, to suggest a metaphorical idea. Leonardo da Vinci regularly arranged aspects of his religious compositions in groups of 3 or subtle triangular formations to signify the Holy Trinity. In the way he portrayed Jesus in the Last Supper, reaching for the bread and wine, he ingeniously signified the indivisibility of God the Father, Christ the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The symbolism in her mother's etching was of entirely different order. The composition was complex, its subject matter unique. The symbolism was certainly not obvious to Francisca. Whatever metaphorical message her mother intended to convey might only be evident once the fresco was complete. Her musings were interrupted as the approaching dawn shifted the shadows cast by the flares, and the sound of the monks, low chanting from the nearby monastery, drifted into the atrium. She could not afford to delay, so she picked herself up and steadily walked up the atrium stairs. It took some time to adjust to the darkness of her bedchamber, but her eye was drawn to the silk stitching that shimmered on the spine of her favorite volume, Leonardo da Vinci's Dreams and Visitations, and soon her writing desk and the outlines of her journal, quill, and inkstand neatly arranged emerged. She went to the windows to open the curtains and let in the light. At the nearby coat stand, she reverently felt the stiffened linen of the painting costume that had been her mother's and that had not been worn for a decade and a half. With a sense of destiny, she changed into it, and as she pulled the straps over her shoulders, she swallowed a lump in her throat. It was as if her mother was cloaking her in her genius and inspiriting her for the day ahead. As she let out her long hair, she caught her reflection in the looking-glass and deftly wove her thick, dark mane into a new braid. She watched her intense, almost black eyes that she had been told she had inherited from her father, and she imagined him look inside the looking-glass, proffering her courage. From early childhood, she had been denied the benefit of his guidance, and she had to find her own point of reference. That she had inherited his eyes, that most personal attribute of his likeness, she regarded as a secret power. Finally, she stole a glance at how her mother's painting costume looked on her. It fit perfectly, and she realized that her mother once had been of fine figure and height, too. But she was both relieved and disappointed to see nothing of what she had been told of her mother's former glamour. The painting costume looked like a commonplace sailor's uniform on her. Even so, she liked the way it drew her latent boyishness out of her. Overwhelmed, she cut off the thought and went to the windows, pushed the heavy mahogany frames wide open, and inhaled deeply. The earthy smell of the stables from the forecourt below wafted up, and she smiled to see the farrier already tending to feel her loyal black stallion. The low thrum of the chanting monks vibrated on the air. She looked up, and there were the last fading stars. Pre-dawn pinks and purples streaked the inky sky, and in the deep golden hue of the sun pushing up towards the horizon, the cathedral pulsed, seemingly alive.